When the software initiates, it will begin with a top-down view onto the brain. The default mode is to have both hemispheres of the brain present at once. We can change this with the buttons that are present across the bottom of the screen. With these buttons, you can select just the left hemisphere, just the right hemisphere, or again return to the mode of viewing both hemispheres at once. With these views, it may still be difficult to orient yourself to where the brain is positioned. You'll see that the button on the very far right is the head button. Pressing this button creates a three-dimensional representation of the head and where the brain sits within it. We can then reorient ourselves by repositioning the brain and rotating it. To do so, push down on the screen, slide forward, and then slide from left to right so that we can take a face-on view of the head. This orientation will allow us to accomplish our first learning objective, to identify the lobes of the brain based off of their anatomical area and their function. So to do this, let's return to our hemispheres view of the brain. And there's two ways we can accomplish this task. On the very left top corner, you'll see a main atlas menu. Press on that. After you press that main atlas menu, there will be multiple options. We're going to press on the lobes option in order to identify the lobes. Listed will be all four lobes of the brain: the frontal, occipital, parietal, and temporal lobes. Because we have a face-on view of the head here, we'll start with the frontal lobe by pressing on that. The lobe will become highlighted in red with the software. We can also select and deselect by pressing on the brain region. If we want to zoom in, hold down with both fingers and expand or widen. To zoom back out, close up with both fingers. To move the brain, simply keep both fingers down and move to the left or move to the right. If we want to identify some of the functions and features of the brain area, you'll see that there's text listing the brain area, here frontal lobe. If we press on that, you'll see that it details some of the areas that make up the frontal lobe, including the prefrontal cortex and motor areas that are involved in movement and speech. If we want to identify the rest of the cortical lobes, we'll need to rotate the brain so we can take a side-on view from the left hemisphere. To do this, again, we'll press just with one finger down and then move from right to left until the brain repositions itself to take a side view. We can now identify the remaining three lobes of the brain. Moving back or more posterior from the frontal lobe, we have the parietal lobe. The parietal lobe contains the somatosensory cortical areas involved in processing touch information from our bodies. Moving even further back from there, we have the temporal lobe. The temporal lobe contains the auditory cortex and the auditory tracts. These are areas that are essential for processing information for hearing sound. Finally, the last lobe in the very back of the brain is the occipital lobe, which contains the visual cortical areas for processing visual information from our eyes. So you'll see that the cortical lobes contain cortex that are involved in higher processing of different functions.